Hello, my name's Maris. I used to think the worst thing my family ever did to me was forgetting my birthday. But that was just the start. They told everyone I was depressed, that I disappeared, that I wanted to die. But the truth? They took everything. My home, my name, my voice, and when I couldn't give anymore, they took my body and pushed it over a cliff. My sister, my husband, they watched me fall. And now, after all the silence, all the lies, I'm here to ask just one thing. What kind of family plans your funeral? Before you're even dead. The photo slipped from my hand and fluttered to the floor, landing face down on the faded rug. I didn't reach for it right away. I just stared at the spot where it had landed. Chest tight, breath shallow. The crack in my chest didn't echo. It grew louder, deeper, more defined. A chasm I'd learned to live around, but never quite filled. I hadn't been back to Monterey in years. Honestly, I always imagined that, if I ever returned, it would be because someone died, or because someone finally remembered I existed. Neither happened. No funeral, no sudden epiphany from anyone left behind. I came back on my own terms. That at least was something. The coastline hadn't changed. It never does. Same jagged cliffs, jutting out like defiant shoulders. Same salt-laced wind, screaming off the Pacific. The kind that slaps your face clean of any illusions. The trees still clung to the rocks like survivors. Weather warped but rooted. It was the house that felt different, or maybe it was me. As I sat in the back of the town car, my hands rested neatly in my lap. Calm on the outside, though I could feel the storm still churning inside. The house grew larger in the windshield as we turned a final curve. Same wraparound porch, same iron lanterns flanking the stone steps. But it didn't welcome me. It stood cold and motionless like it had turned its back on me a long time ago. The driver didn't say much. A polite nod when he parked. No small talk, no questions. He opened the door and I wheeled myself out, slow and steady, up the stone path I once raced down barefoot as a child. Back when scraped knees were the only pain I knew, and the house still held echoes of something resembling love. Everything was too quiet now. Not peaceful, curated, controlled. I could practically hear Celine's voice still living in the walls, controlling what was seen, what was hidden, and what was rewritten. They thought I was gone for good, I whispered as I reached the door. But today, I walk into the courtroom they built on lies. 3 years ago, I stood in this kitchen, this same kitchen, slicing tomatoes for a family dinner. I hadn't been invited to help plan. The fridge hummed. The knife moved rhythmically, and no one asked what Dad's favorite side dish was, or whether Mom preferred candles on the table or just flowers. That was all Celine's territory now. Her domain, her performance. Maurice, could you refill the drinks again? She called out from the living room, eyes never lifting from her phone screen. I didn't answer right away. My hands were wet with tomato juice. I wiped them on my apron and picked up the tray of lemonade glasses, careful not to let them clink. Babe, can you not make it weird? Ronan added casually, smiling like a man who knew he could get away with anything. Just help. Okay, I smiled back. Just enough to pass. Just enough to not set off alarms, like someone who hadn't spent all day cooking, like someone who hadn't been slowly erased out of her own family narrative, one passive-aggressive comment at a time. Dinner was exactly what you'd expect. Loud, performative, full of compliments for Celine's flawless hosting, her curated wine pairings, her elegant table arrangement. You're so organized, Celine, Aunt Nora gushed, lifting her second glass of. You always think of everything. Everything I'd done. Every little thing went unnoticed. The recipes I chose, the flowers I arranged, the seating chart I reworked when Uncle Stan mentioned his site. It was all hers, because she said so. I caught Ronan's eye from across the table once. Just once. He looked away, not with guilt, with boredom. Later that night, once the guests were gone, and the last spoon had been loaded into the dishwasher, I climbed into bed beside him. He was already propped up, staring into his tablet. I watched his face for a few seconds. Blank, detached. What are you working on? I asked softly. Just checking emails, he muttered, not looking up. That was his tone now. Casual, distant, slippery. The kind that didn't invite questions, but didn't sound cruel either. The kind of voice that leaves you doubting your instincts. I turned over, facing the wall, but sleep didn't come. So, I waited until I heard the telltale shift in his breathing. The deep, steady kind that meant he was asleep, detached, even in rest. Then, I picked up his tablet. He hadn't even locked it. It was right there, Open a folder labeled Plan B, Wedding Options. My heart didn't race. My pulse didn't spike because somewhere deep down I already knew. I clicked the folder. The first photo was of a beach. The second was of Celine, in a white gown holding a bouquet of pies, staring directly into the lens, like she belonged there, like she knew, like she'd been waiting. I couldn't breathe, not from shock, from recognition. The puzzle pieces were old. The picture had always been forming. The way Celine's hand lingered too long on his arm, the shared glances at dinner, they thought I hadn't noticed. The way she described him as the anchor of the family. A rock. Her rock. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was too sensitive, too emotional, that the unease in my gut was grief, not betrayal. But there it was, their truth, dressed in white lace and lies. I set the tablet down gently, quietly. I didn't wake him, didn't cry. I just lay there and stared at the ceiling. The same ceiling I'd stared at the night before our wedding. The same one I'd imagined decorating a nursery under. The same ceiling that had witnessed my vows, my dreams, and now my eraser. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up tracing the outlines of every moment I had doubted myself, every time I silenced my own instincts, because they told me to calm down or stop making it awkward. They didn't need to kill me with a weapon, they just needed me to keep questioning myself long enough to steal everything. The next morning, I made breakfast. Eggs over easy for Ronan. Oatmeal with blueberries for Celine. They sat side by side at the kitchen island, sipping coffee and laughing about an upcoming charity gala, like the world hadn't shifted beneath them. You should come with us, Celine said, brushing a crumb from her sleeve. You've been cooped up too long. Some ocean air might be good for you. Ronan nodded, chewing. Yeah, it'll help clear your head. I smiled. Sounds good, I replied, because I knew exactly what they were planning, and I needed to see just how far they were willing to go. I didn't fall apart. I did what any woman with nothing left to lose would do. I started digging. The following weeks passed like a film on mute. My body went through the motions, showering, dressing, making toast, but my mind was elsewhere, focused, sharp, dangerous. Celine had invited herself into every part of my life without asking. Ronan followed her lead as always, but they hadn't counted on me still being here, still breathing, still thinking. 2 months after that night, on the cliff, I found myself sitting in the back pew of San Carlos Cathedral, a stranger, in a place that used to hold my family's most sacred memories. I remember running up the aisle during Easter services as a child, my mother hissing at me to sit down, my father's hand on my shoulder, grounding. Now, they were both gone, and my name hadn't even made it into the program. Celine stood at the podium, draped in a tasteful black dress, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that matched her heels. Ronan sat 2 rows ahead of me, his arm gently resting on the back of Celine's seat, as if they were hosting a gala instead of mourning. I washed my mother's hair the night before she passed, I thought, staring at the back of their heads. Celine hadn't visited in months, and yet here she was, haloed by tears and applause. They spoke of legacy, of love, of resilience. No one mentioned the daughter who had sat beside our mother's hospice bed every day for weeks, the one who changed the morphine patches, who read aloud from the books Mom once adored. That daughter didn't make the cut. When the service ended, people trickled out slowly, sharing hugs and condolences with Celine. Not me. No one asked how I was holding up. No one even made eye contact. Afterward, everyone gathered at the estate for the usual post-funeral reception. Food catered, wine flowing. Celine moved through the crowd with polished ease, accepting sympathy like a politician. Her hand always ready, her words just rehearsed enough to seem genuine. She found me standing by the fireplace, pretending to sip from a glass of water I hadn't touched. Hey, she said, brushing non-existent lint off my shoulder. You okay? I nodded slowly. Wary. You understand? Right. It's not about you. It's about presentation. The last thing Mom would have wanted is drama. She smiled tight and condescending. We kept things simple. I forced a smile. Simple. Sure. Ronan joined us. It was a beautiful service. Celine really pulled everything together. I almost laughed. Of course she did. They moved on before I could say anything else, probably worried I'd break the mood or the illusion. A week later, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Halberd, the family accountant. He'd managed our parents' estate for over 20 years. I hadn't told Celine I wanted answers before confrontation. His office hadn't changed. Still smelled like leather and old books. Still had the same framed diplomas and photos of his golden retrievers. "Maris?" he said, motioning toward the chair. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." I gave a weak smile. Figured I should at least know what I've inherited. He opened a file folder and started speaking like I was made of glass. Technically, under current documentation, the estate falls under the control of Celine Dorn. I blinked. "I thought Mom and Dad left everything split." He looked uncomfortable. "They did, but your legal status was modified after your accident. You were designated medically incapable of managing your own affairs." The words didn't sink in right away. I stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Celine and Ronan filed the paperwork," he added gently. "It was official by the time you were discharged." That was the moment it clicked. I hadn't just been left out. I'd been erased legally. Deliberately. "I wasn't sick," I said, voice sharper than I meant. "I wasn't unstable. I was grieving." He offered a look of pity. I didn't need it. Later that night, I dug through a dusty box of mail I'd never bothered to open. It had followed me from the hospital to my apartment, then to rehab, and finally back here. Junk mail mostly, but, in the middle, a thick envelope from my bank. It contained notices of joint account transfers, significant amounts. Maris Ball listed as co-owner with Celine Dorn. Celine had gained power of attorney. She used it to move my savings, my insurance payout into accounts I no longer had access to. She didn't even flinch while doing it. I sat at the kitchen table, letters spread out like crime scene photos. I read them again and again, making sure it wasn't a mistake, a technicality, anything other than what it was. They'd stolen from me while I was still alive. I didn't cry. I made coffee. I didn't scream. I made copies. I didn't fall apart. I did what any woman with nothing left to lose would do. I started digging. I thought I died that night, but I was wrong. Something worse than death happened. The cold that met my skin as I regained consciousness was different. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from wind or water. It was something deeper settled into the bones. Still, before that, there had been another cold, the kind I felt behind the wheel on Highway 267, 2 winters before the cliff. It had started like any ordinary evening, if driving your father to the emergency room in a blizzard could ever be considered ordinary. He'd been struggling with chest pain since lunch, too stubborn to tell anyone until I noticed the color drain from his face. Celine said she was busy. Something about a client dinner in Carmel. Ronan had a work call he couldn't miss. So, it was me. Always me. I helped Dad into the car, wrapping an old blanket around his shoulders, before lifting him slowly into the passenger seat. Snow had just started falling when I backed out of the driveway. I told myself it wasn't that bad, but 20 meters in, visibility dropped to a whisper. "Just keep talking to me, Dad," I said, gripping the wheel tighter. He was trying, his words slurred. I could feel the weight of every minute in my chest. A truck flew past in the opposite lane. The wind it kicked up nudged us just enough. I overcorrected. Black ice did the rest. The car spun. Metal shrieked. I remember a flash of white as the airbags deployed, the sharp smell of burnt chemicals filling the cabin. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was my father's hands still clenching the blanket, as if trying to hold something together. He didn't make it. I did. When I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, they told me about the spinal damage. Words like incomplete injury, wheelchair, and mobility therapy swirled around my head like snowflakes that refused to melt. Celine came once. She stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, mascara untouched. "I just don't know how this happened," she said, her tone hollow. "You always took care of everything." Ronan brought flowers. Not once did he meet my eyes. That was the first time I felt it. The shift, like they'd already moved on. Still, I tried to convince myself otherwise. So when they invited me months later to get some fresh air at a small picnic near the shoreline, I said yes against every instinct. Because I wanted to believe family meant something. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, there was still a version of us that could exist. The day was unnaturally bright. Celine had packed a basket, something she never did herself. Ronan was quiet, his phone mysteriously absent. We drove along the coast, the kind of ride we used to take when we were teenagers escaping the house on Sundays. Celine spread a blanket on the grass near the cliffs. We ate in silence. They tried to talk about neutral things, weather, news, a TV show neither of them actually watched. They were either apologizing, I remember thinking, or planning something. I didn't know which one scared me more. After lunch, Celine suggested a walk. The trail they picked wasn't paved. I hesitated. It's mostly flat, Ronan said quickly. I'll push. Something inside me flinched, but I nodded. Letting go of control had become too familiar. I told myself I was overthinking again. The ocean was loud that day, crashing against the cliffs like it was trying to warn me. The sky, though, was calm. Falsely so. I should have noticed the way Celine lagged behind while Ronan pushed me forward. At a bend in the trail, he stopped. The edge wasn't far. Mind if we pause here? I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't answer. I turned slightly to look back. Celine stood just out of reach, hands in her coat pockets, watching. Please, Celine, Ronan, don't, I started. Selena's voice cut through the wind, not loud, not angry, cold. Dead weight doesn't belong in the spotlight. And then Ronan, let go. For a second, there was silence, just the squeak of the wheels and the thrum of my own heartbeat. The cliff rushed toward me, or maybe I rushed toward it. I couldn't tell. Gravity had no mercy, only momentum. I remember the air, rushing past my ears, the tilt of the sky, the suddenness of the stop, and then nothing, just dark. I didn't wake up for hours. When I did, I was cold, not shivering, but soaked to the marrow. My limbs refused to listen. I tasted salt in my mouth and blood on my tongue. The world was sideways, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was what the end felt like. Quiet, aching, unfinished. But it wasn't the end. Somewhere in the distance, a voice called out. Footsteps approached, hesitant, but fast. A light shone briefly over my face, then disappeared. She's alive, a man muttered. Thank God. I wanted to speak to, ask who he was, where I was, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. My eyes shut again before I could see anything more. Later, I'd learn it was a fisherman, an old man named Theo, who liked to walk early before his morning route. If he hadn't looked over that edge, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But at the time, all I knew was the pain in my spine, the burning in my lungs, and the echo of Celine's voice, dead weight. It clung to me, even as strangers lifted my body and carried me to help. Even as sirens wailed and machines beeped and doctors whispered in worried tones, dead weight. That's what they saw me as. That's why they let go. But I wasn't dead and I wasn't weightless either. I was rising. I stopped healing that day. I started preparing. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of a monitor to my right, and the distant hum of a floor polisher somewhere down the hallway. My eyes drifted to the clock above the door. It was nearly 3 a.m., though you'd never know it from the bright fluorescent light leaking through the gap under the door. I'd been conscious for 3 days. At least that's what the nurses said. At first I couldn't speak. My throat was raw from salt water and disuse. Even when I finally could whisper, no one really listened. The staff spoke gently, but their eyes betrayed something else. Like they'd been warned? The first nurse who came in called me, honey, like I was 5 years old. She fluffed my pillow, avoided eye contact, and whispered as she leaned over to adjust my fore. Your sister said not to disturb you. She said, you needed time. That word, again? Time. Celine had always known how to bend it, make her mistakes vanish behind a perfectly timed smile or a well-timed exit. She'd managed to frame this whole situation as if I needed space, peace, quiet. But what I really needed was the truth. No one came to see me. No flowers, no cards, nothing from Ronan, nothing from Celine. They hadn't even listed me under my real name. According to the hospital records, I was Jane Doe's suicide watch. The chart at the foot of my bed detailed self-harm via attempted cliffside jump and included a note from a family representative suggesting a history of mental instability. When the social worker finally appeared, she spoke slowly like I was a confused child. They said you've had depressive episodes, she explained, her voice soft but clinical. Your husband said you'd been withdrawing, that you'd stopped attending therapy, stopped taking your medication. I never had therapy, I rasped, and I never took medication. She frowned, flipping through a thin folder. There was a note, she added. Left in your purse. Ronan found it. I never wrote a note. I said stronger this time. I didn't even pack a bag. Her eyes met mine for the first time with uncertainty, but she closed the folder anyway. That evening after dinner, a tray of grayish chicken and overcooked carrots I barely touched. I asked the nurse to wheel me to the courtyard. It took convincing, but I needed air. I needed to feel something other than the walls of that room pressing in on me. The courtyard was modest. A few benches, some planter boxers, with neglected flowers. The ocean breeze crept over the walls, bringing with it the scent of salt and damp earth. I parked my chair near the fountain, closed my eyes. That's when I saw him. An older man dressed in a faded windbreaker was sitting a few yards away, a thick paperback in his hands. He glanced at me briefly, but didn't stare. Instead, he folded a page, closed the book, and walked over slowly. "You're her," he said. His voice wasn't accusing, it was certain. I blinked. "Excuse me, the girl on the cliff?" he continued, his voice lower. "You're Maris Blythe." I felt my breath catch. My fingers tightened on the armrests of the wheelchair. "Who are you?" I asked wearily. "My name's Henry," he said. "I live up the trail. I walk every morning. Same path, same time. That day I saw you them." I didn't speak, I couldn't. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small plastic case. I recorded it, not on purpose. I was testing a new drone my grandson gave me. I was flying it over the water, trying to get footage of the sunrise. But the drone picked up more than just waves. He held out the case. I didn't know what to do. But when I saw you wheeled out here tonight, I figured the universe finally told me. I took the memory card with both hands, my skin numb where it touched the plastic. My heart thudded so loudly I thought he might hear it. That night, I waited until the hallway lights dimmed and the nurses retreated to their station. I closed the curtain around my bed, pulled out my laptop, one of the only things the hospital hadn't confiscated, and inserted the card. It loaded slowly. My fingers shook. The video opened with soft crashing waves and the sky turning orange. Then came the trail, the curve of the cliff, a bench, a wheelchair, me. The footage zoomed enough to catch the details. Celine standing to the side, arms folded, Ronan behind me, one hand on the back of my chair. They were speaking, but there was no sound, only movement. Celine leaned in, said something. Ronan let go. The wheelchair moved. I moved, and then gone. I watched it 3 times. On the 4th, I paused on Celine's face. Her lips curled, not into a grimace, not into shock, into a smirk. I sat there in that dim hospital room, back straight, the laptop's glow, the only light. I let the image burn itself into my memory. "They thought no one saw," I whispered. "But someone did. And now I see everything. They built a cage around me. Now I'm forging keys, and I'm not the only one watching." It started with a TV segment. A quiet Sunday morning. I just finished my 2nd cup of decaf, and was waiting for the nurse to return with my medication. The volume on the wall-mounted television had been left low by the previous patient, but I recognized Celine's voice before I even saw her face. There she was, picture perfect, on the local morning show, seated beside a host with polished teeth and a voice too syrupy to be real. The headline beneath them read, "A Sister's Strength. How Celine Dorn Became a Beacon After Tragedy." I froze. She was talking about me. About the accident, about how she'd been doing everything in her power to support me through my mental health challenges. Her words were measured, careful, just enough empathy to sound noble, just enough distance to avoid accountability. "I miss her," Celine said, eyes misty. "She's alive, yes, but not the way she used to be. It's like I lost her twice." The camera panned in as she lifted a hand to her collarbone, and there it was, the necklace. My mother's final gift to me. I'd been wearing it the day Ronan pushed me over that cliff. It had fallen from my neck as I plummeted, and I never saw it again until now. "She's wearing it," I whispered. The nurse glanced over. "Sorry." I shook my head. Nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Celine had taken the last thing my mother gave me and paraded it around on TV like a medal she earned for surviving my supposed breakdown. Like I was her burden to bear. My stomach churned, but I didn't look away. I stared at the screen, rewinding the DVR feed and zooming in. My fingers trembled as I paused the image. Same chain, same locket, same scratch from where I dropped it during a fight with my mom that we never fully made up from. And then it clicked. I opened the footage Henry had given me. This time, I didn't just watch for the moment Ronan released the brakes. I watched everything frame by frame. There it was. As the wheelchair began to roll forward, the necklace lifted, caught in the air for a second, like a ribbon in the wind. The camera caught it. My necklace mid-flight, and now she wore it. She wore my proof to her own celebration. I muttered, "That's not bold. That's sloppy." That night, while the rest of the rehab floor slept, I scrolled through social media with one hand and scribbled notes with the other. I made a list of names, reporters who had once covered local corruption, bloggers with a history of exposing family scandals, even a true crime podcast that had previously investigated questionable deaths in Montana. Then I opened a small wooden box I kept under my bed. Inside was a stack of letters I never sent and one I had only just received. It was from Margaret. Margaret had been my patient years ago, back when I worked in long-term care. A stroke survivor with brittle bones and a sharper tongue than anyone else on the floor. She'd had no family, no visitors, and a mouth that could ruin your whole afternoon if you weren't careful. But we'd connected somehow. I made her laugh and she made me stronger. The letter was short. They say you lost your mind, but I remember who you were to me. You are my anchor, Maris. If they can't see that, now, I'll make sure they do. Attached was a scanned copy of a handwritten statement Margaret had posted publicly on her social media of all places. One of her former caregivers had helped her upload it, and it had already started making the rounds. The post read, "I was in a hospital bed, helpless, when Maris Boole walked into my life. She didn't just care for my body, she restored my spirit. The media says she's unstable. I say she saved me, and if my voice still counts for anything, I use it now to defend hers." The post had hundreds of shares within a day, then thousands, and people started talking. A local journalist reached out through a rehab staff member she wanted to meet. She'd seen the clip Henry had provided leaked anonymously to her inbox. She wanted to verify its authenticity. Suddenly, Selen's pristine image began to blur. Under a thread titled, "Justice for Maris," people posted screenshots of the video and stills of Celine on TV, side-by-side comparisons of the necklace, quotes from Margaret's letter. Someone even found a cached version of the medical report that listed me as unstable, yet conveniently included no psychological evaluation. For the first time in months, the air around me felt different. It wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about being seen. It was about being believed. Celine had spent years curating an identity, a selfless sister, a corporate powerhouse, a woman of grace and grit. But Grace doesn't smirk when her sister falls off a cliff. I wasn't naive. I knew the world didn't turn on one post or one video. But I also knew this. Celine built her career on controlling the story. She wouldn't survive the truth, and the truth had finally found its way out. I warned them. But some people only understand consequences. The days that followed felt like moving through a hallway lined with doors, and each one opened a little wider than the last. Word was spreading. The video clip had made its rounds. Not just the raw footage from Henry's drone, but an edited version. Someone, maybe a sympathetic nurse or volunteer, had turned into a short video online. The voiceover was mine. Not from an interview, not from a prepared statement, just a recording I'd made on my phone weeks earlier. Talking to myself in the dark back when I still was unsure if anyone would ever hear me. I wasn't depressed, I had said, barely above a whisper. I was discarded. I didn't fall. I was erased. That single line was set to footage of waves crashing, the curve of the cliff's edge, and then frame by frame, the wheelchair rolling forward. Still shots of my hospital bed, the bruises, the fading for marks, a silhouette of Celine at her charity gala, smiling, necklace catching the light. Justice for Maris started trending within hours. The rehab center was buzzing. Staff walked past me with nervous smiles. One orderly gave me a subtle thumbs up. The receptionist, who hadn't said more than 10 words to me in the last 2 weeks, suddenly offered me herbal tea and called me Miss Blythe. Then 2 days later, Calder Vivin showed up. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to speak to someone who didn't doubt me. We met in a small private office on the second floor of the rehab center. He looked younger than I remembered, worn in the eyes, sharper in the shoulders. The suit wasn't expensive, but it was clean, honest, like him. "I've been following everything," he said, not wasting time. "The footage, the letter, the interviews. People are listening now." I nodded. "Good. But I need more than attention. You need action," he finished. "That's why I'm here." We spent the next hour going through my notes, dates, transactions, voice memos. I handed over everything I had. Henry's full footage, screenshots of the necklace, the letter from Margaret. He listened carefully, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked me dead in the eye. "You're not crazy," he said, "and they're not careful. Let's make this official." By Friday, the lawsuit was filed. Attempted murder, financial fraud, emotional abuse, civil for now, but with enough teeth to draw blood. The legal documents were served to Selen's publicists and Ronan's firm within 24 hours. I didn't hear anything directly from them until the call came. It was late, just past 8 o'clock in the evening. I was alone in my new assisted apartment. The windows were cracked open slightly, letting in the cool, salt air from the coast. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Maris, her voice hadn't changed. Still smooth? Still sugar-laced? You're confused, she said calmly. And that's okay. I get it. Trauma does strange things to people. I didn't say a word. I just think, she continued, before you go too far down this road, you should think about what you're really doing. You're hurting a lot of people, Maris. People who cared about you. I'm hurting people, I finally said. There was silence on the line. You made it worse, I told her. When you watched me fall and walked away, the line went dead. The next morning, Calder held the press conference. It was outside the Monterey County Courthouse beneath a gray sky that threatened rain but never delivered. He stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by microphones and reporters. Today we're here not for drama or spectacle, he began, but for justice. My client Maris Blythe was nearly murdered by two people she trusted, her husband and her sister. She was financially stripped, emotionally manipulated, and legally silenced. But today, that silence ends. He read from the lawsuit directly, citing case numbers and clauses. But it wasn't the legal jargon that caught people's attention. It was the footage playing silently on a monitor nearby. The wheelchair, the fall, Selin's face, Ronan's hand. I watched from the car parked just across the street. The windows were tinted. I wasn't ready to walk into that crowd. Not yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. People pointed at the screen. One woman covered her mouth. A reporter whispered something to her colleague while jotting frantic notes. And in that moment, for the first time since I'd hit those rocks, I felt seen. Not pied, believed. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about correction, restoration. And no matter how long it took, I knew this. They had tried to bury me in silence, but I'd turned their lies into volume. By the time they realized the roof was on fire, I'd already left the match. It was barely past 7 when I arrived at Calder's office. I'd slept maybe 3 hours the night before, but adrenaline has a way of faking rest. He was already there, sleeves rolled, coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. I didn't need to ask. He had found something. He motioned for me to sit. No small talk this time. Just facts. They moved the money before the funeral, he said, flipping open the folder. 2 days before your father died, Selene filed paperwork to reallocate the estate's primary trust. And here, he pulled out a document, tapped his finger against a signature. She notarized this herself. That's not just shady Maris. It's fraud, a clear conflict of interest, and illegal without independent witnesses. The name stared back at me. My name forged in soft looping ink and beneath it, hers, stamped like a seal of finality. They'd been planning your eraser for years, Calder said. The moment your parents' health declined, they started drawing lines, and you weren't on the right side of them. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I already knew why. Selene couldn't stand being second. Not in business, not in the family, not in anything. And Ronan, he just followed whatever fed his ego. By midday, the internet had handed us another gift. It came from an unexpected place. A comment thread beneath a photo of a tourist's dog at a beach trail. Random, casual, and explosive. Is this the cliff you mentioned? Someone asked. I saw a couple arguing there weeks ago. I filmed part of it because the guy looked like he was yelling. My boyfriend said I was being dramatic. Attached was a shaky 15-second clip. You couldn't hear words, but faces were visible enough. There was Ronan and Selene. 15 minutes before I was reported missing. Calder played it 3 times in a row before speaking. We don't need them to confess, he said, leaning back. They just did. He sent it off to the news outlets, the prosecutor's office, and a few legal influencers online. Within hours, it spread faster than we could keep up. People began connecting dots that had always been there. The video, the silence, the perfect PR timing. Then came Selene. She booked herself on a popular podcast that aired late-night interviews with high-profile public figures. The host, a man who prided himself on cutting through the noise, asked her one question. Why now? Why speak? She smiled like someone trying not to vomit. My sister always needed attention, she said. Even when we were little, she couldn't stand not being the center of everything. Maybe this time she finally got enough. It was a calculated move. Reframe me as the unstable one. Reinforced the idea that my trauma was manufactured, a long game for pity, but the internet wasn't buying it anymore. People pulled her quotes side by side then and now. They replayed moments, she contradicted herself. pointed out that the necklace she wore in that interview had belonged to me. Maybe she should be more worried about prison fashion. One user commented. It got 80,000 likes, but the final nail didn't come from her. It came from Ronan, his assistant, a man named Travis, who had always kept his head down, leaked an audio recording to an anonymous tip line. Within hours, it was online and everywhere. You think I meant for her to live? Ronan's voice crackled. She wasn't supposed to survive. We checked. There was no way she could have clicked. That was it. 16 seconds of arrogance, of carelessness and confession. Calder called me that night. They're done, he said. This clip, combined with the timeline, the forged documents, the footage, it's more than civil now, it's criminal. I was quiet. You, okay? He asked. Yeah, I answered after a beat, just remembering how they looked at me like I was the problem. We sat on the phone a while longer. No need to speak, just space, just breath. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by press fans. The headlines were merciless. Sister or suspect, estate heir or attempted murderer. Truth finally finds Maris Blythe. I stayed inside that day. Didn't need to be in front of cameras to feel the shift. I could feel it through the walls, through the wind, through the silence that followed when people finally stopped pretending. Ronan was seen leaving his office later that week with his lawyer, face pale, hands shaking. Selene canalled all upcoming speaking engagements, claiming emotional distress, public sympathy once her armor was gone. And me, I waited because I knew what came next. I didn't celebrate. I went home. And there, I remembered everything I still had to grieve. The morning sun had not yet cut through the Mtare fog when my car pulled up to the courthouse. The air was thick, the kind that clings to your skin, not quite rain, not quite clear. I sat in the back seat for a moment longer, my palms resting on my lap, steady in a way they hadn't been for months. I didn't need to be coached. I didn't need anyone to open the door for me. I reached for the handle, pulled it open, and wheeled myself out. Black suit pressed, hair pulled back, no jewelry except the locket that rightfully belonged to me. It had been recovered from the rocks days after the fall, tangled in kelp. I had it cleaned, repaired, and I wore it now, not for show, but for the woman who gave it to me. People were already gathered outside. Reporters, locals, faces I didn't recognize, but when I rolled past them, I heard it. That's her. I think that's the Sister Maris Blythe. I wasn't afraid of them seeing me. I wanted them to. The courtroom was smaller than it seemed in pictures. I'd spent weeks imagining it, where Selene would sit, how Ronan would look, what the judge's voice might sound like. But none of that compared to being inside. I rolled forward, positioned myself where Calder told me to, and waited. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I didn't have to, but I met his eyes when he looked at me. The bailiff called out names. Then Calder stood, his voice firm. Your Honor, my client, Maris Blythe, is here to contest the legal, financial, and physical abuse suffered at the hands of her sister, Selene Dorn, and her husband, Ronan Hale. We intend to prove conspiracy, fraud, and attempted homicide supported by evidence and direct witness testimony. A murmur spread through the gallery. Then I spoke, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Maris Blythe, I am alive. I am here to be heard. Gasps echoed, faint but sharp. Selene flinched, just a blink, but I saw it. Ronan didn't look at me at all. The court went through standard motions, documents reviewed, timelines re-established. Calder outlined every transfer, every false signature, every manipulation down to the day. Then came the part that mattered. Calder turned toward the judge. With the court's permission, I would like to introduce a last-minute witness, a man whose testimony will verify the footage previously submitted. The doors opened. Henry entered. He wore his windbreaker, pressed slacks, and a hat he took off the moment he crossed the threshold. His walk was slow but confident. He took the stand, hands steady as he was sworn in. Mr. Henry Whitaker, can you tell the court what you saw the morning of March 6th? I was walking the ridge near Point Luce around 6:45 a.m. I had my drone out. I fly it for sunrise footage. That morning, it captured something else. He paused. A woman in a wheelchair being pushed toward the cliff. Two individuals beside her. One male, one female. Can you identify them? Calder asked. Henry pointed. That's them. Selene stood suddenly. This is absurd. He doesn't know what he saw. The judge held up a hand. Ms. Dorn, sit down. The clip played. There was no sound, but there didn't need to be. It showed everything. Me, the wheelchair, Ronan behind me. Celine to the side, her hand raised, waving, gesturing. Then her mouth moved. The text zoomed in. The AI transcription software filled in a guess. Toss her already. No one's coming. Then Ronan's hand let go. The wheels turned and I disappeared from frame. The courtroom was silent. You could hear someone's breath catch in the back row. Even the judge leaned forward. "This is manipulated," Celine shouted, rising again. "No, Ms. Dorn," the judge said, voice firm. "That's evidence." Ronan's lawyer didn't say a word. Neither did Ronan. 30 minutes later, after a recess, the judge returned. In light of the overwhelming visual and testimonial evidence, the court finds sufficient cause to escalate charges from civil to criminal. Ms. Dorn will be indicted on counts of fraud, perjury, and attempted murder. Mr. Hale will be remanded to county jail pending further investigation. The gavel hit the block once. Sharp. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I sat breathing. The world didn't tilt or burst open. No orchestra swelled, but inside, something quiet clicked back into place. Ronan was cuffed and let out, his head down. Celine screamed at the bailiff, calling the process a circus, claiming I'd do doctored everything, called in favors, that none of this was real, but I didn't move and I didn't speak again. I didn't have to. I'd already said everything that mattered. I didn't celebrate, no champagne, no clinking glasses, no slow-motion applause or triumphant soundtrack in the background. I went home. And once there, I remembered everything. I still had to grieve. It was a quiet return. Not hollow, not bitter, just still. I closed the front door gently behind me and leaned against it for a beat longer than necessary. The walls of my apartment greeted me the way they always had, softly, without demand. Outside, the ocean hummed in its usual rhythm, a deep and distant song that seeped in through the cracked window above the sink. The smell of salt water drifted in, tangled with the faint trace of lavender from the neighbor's wreath hanging just beyond the doorframe. The verdict had landed like a thunderclap, loud, final, undeniable. But it was the silence afterward that carried weight. That was where everything real settled in. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea between my palms. It had long since cooled, but I held it anyway, not for warmth, but for grounding. I waited for something I couldn't quite name. Closure. Peace. The sudden lifting of all the heaviness I'd carried. It didn't come. And maybe that was okay. The next afternoon, Calder came by. He didn't knock twice. Just a soft rap and the quiet sound of his key turning in the lock. We'd exchanged them months ago, more out of convenience than commitment, though lately he'd taken to treating mine with a kind of reverence. He stepped in, carrying a thin stack of documents, and a familiar expression. Careful, kind, but with something harder underneath. The kind of look people wear when they know victory tastes different than expected. "It's all official," he said, placing the papers on the counter like they might break if he moved too fast. "Ronan's in custody. Celine's under house arrest. The federal charges are lined up: fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder." I stared at the tea again. "I one called her," I said. My voice didn't shake, but it didn't hold pride either. "But this doesn't feel like winning." He didn't try to correct me. Instead, he pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't try to fill the air with reassurance. He just let the space breathe, and I appreciated him for that more than anything else. We spoke for a while about logistics, legalities, how the media was devouring Celine now faster than it had ever questioned her. Internet sympathy turns cold quickly, especially when it realizes it's been lied to. But even as he talked, my mind wandered to everything that had been lost before it had been acknowledged. Later, after Calder left, I opened the velvet box. The locket sat inside, nestled gently on dark fabric. I lifted it slowly. It felt heavier than I remembered, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of memories pressed into metal. I set it down on my nightstand. I needed space from it, just for a while. 2 days later, I went to the cemetery. The path was familiar. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels of my chair as I rolled slowly toward the back section, the one that overlooked the water. Mom had picked the spot, she used to say. The ocean made everything feel bigger than pain. Like maybe if you sat near it long enough, your grief would stretch out and dissolve across the waves. The breeze that day was gentle. It brushed against my face like a memory reaching out to check if I still remembered how to feel. I stopped at the headstone. Simple, clean, my parents' names, side by side. No elaborate inscriptions, just facts etched in stone. finally unshakable. I reached into my pocket and opened the box. The locket glinted in the pale sun. I held it in my palm for a moment longer, rubbing my thumb across its surface. The chain had been fixed, the clasp was new, but inside, the photo remained. Mom and me at my high school graduation, both of us beaming. I had forgotten how tightly she'd hugged me that day. "I know you tried," I whispered. My voice cracked just a little. "You gave me what you could, and they tried to take it, but you raised someone who knows how to survive." I placed the locket gently at the base of the headstone and tucked it beneath a small rock, so the wind would claim it. Too quickly? Something about leaving it there felt less like letting go and more like letting her stay. The wind nudged me forward as I turned to leave. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and watched the stars emerge, one by one. Some flickered, some stayed steady, none demanded attention. They just existed, quietly asserting their presence. Among the stack of mail on my table sat a pale blue envelope I hadn't noticed earlier. No return address. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. I opened it with the letter opener I kept for bills and hospital paperwork. Inside was a single page. "Dear Maris, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. I was a student nurse on rotation when you worked at Greenhaven. You trained me. You told me that listening was more important than speaking. That silence could be powerful, but it should never be used to hide. I watched your trial. I watched how you carried yourself. You made me believe that silence doesn't mean surrender, that survival can be graceful. I'm applying to nursing school next month because of you. Thank you, Lena." I read it once, then again, then I folded it gently and placed it in the drawer where I keep only the things I refuse to lose. Not out of fear, but because they remind me why I stayed. The next morning, I filled out the first page of an application for a trauma-informed counseling certification. Not to practice professionally, not yet. Just to learn, to understand how to hold space for others like me, women who had been quiet too long, women still stitching their stories back together. 2 weeks later, I led the first meeting of our support group. The room was small, folding chairs, store-bought cookies, a coffee pot that took forever to brew. Nervous laughter bounced off the walls. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh paint. We went around in a circle, no pressure to share, but most of us did. And when it was my turn, I didn't hesitate. "They took pieces of me," I said, "but not all of me. Never all." Some women nodded. One squeezed her hands in her lap. Another whispered, "Me, too." That was enough. That was everything. I left the center that evening, feeling something I hadn't in years. Anchored. I knew the scars on my shoulder weren't going anywhere. I knew I'd still hear Celine's voice sometimes, sharp and smug, echoing through memory. I knew I'd still jump a little when I smelled his cologne on strangers, but I also knew this. I didn't need Ronan or Celine to validate the damage they'd done, and I sure as hell didn't need them to define what came next. I'd built my own wheels, and I'm still rolling. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us deepest, and the silence they leave behind can echo for years. But silence isn't surrender, and survival isn't weakness. Maris didn't just reclaim her name. She proved that justice can come even when it feels impossible. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? Let us know in the comments. And do you forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal the darkest sides of family and the strength it takes to rise.